Hello everyone, welcome to my channel about writing stuff. My name's Camille and today we are veering off course a little bit. I have been writing and submitting a lot of short fiction lately, so I kind of wanted to talk about the submitting process, specifically for submitting short fiction to science fiction and fantasy magazines, because that's where I have been submitting. And if you're currently in a situation where you've written a short story or a couple short stories that you really love and you are just so excited about, I wanted to give you just a few tips and point out a few things that you could be expecting or some things to look out for. I have not had any of my short stories picked up yet, though I have received some decent feedback from a couple of managing editors and editors-in-chief. And it's a very anxious, nerve-wracking process, especially for me. This sort of thing, the submitting process, really ramps up my anxiety, and it can be very uncomfortable, but also very exciting. One thing to keep in mind, though, is if you are submitting to these magazines, the big name magazines, and the magazines that I mean are like F&SF, Asimov's, Clarkesworld, Apex, UnCanny, Lightspeed, all of these science fiction fantasy magazines. Most of them send out a monthly issue. Most of them are online magazines, although some do print as well or have a publishing aspect to their magazine. But the thing to keep in mind here is these magazines receive hundreds of submitted stories a month and usually only publish about 4 short stories per month, as well as, some do poetry, some include a novella or a novelette here and there, but it's really hard to be published in one of these magazines, especially if you don't have any publishing credentials or anything on your resume. It's hard, and getting rejected sucks. I do have a video about that, but something to keep in mind is if you were really passionate about a story that you wrote and you love it, and if it's a type of story that even you as an author can't stop thinking about, then you want to send that out and at least try and get some feedback, if not a send me more request, just so that you're doing something right. But yeah, you don't want to set your expectations too high, because let down really sucks. So just understand that you are one of hundreds of people that are submitting to these magazines every month, and there are typically only like 4 slots. So if you get rejected, just send it somewhere else, write more stories, just keep writing, keep submitting, and you will get there. It's causal. You do the work and you will get there eventually. So the first thing, I'm not going to talk about writing short stories. I'll probably do another video on how to write short fiction. This video is just going to be about making sure your short story is ready, and then the actual submitting process. So what I mean by making sure it's ready, manuscript format for a short story is slightly different than a novel. A lot of the guideline pages on these magazine submittal sites have a link to the standard manuscript doc format. So you want to take a look at that. It's in a novel, you don't have to indent a new line after a scene break, but you do in a short story. The proper way to break a scene is to have a single line with a pound sign, things like this. You should have like your name and your address and phone number, top left-hand corner, approximate word count, right-hand corner, things like that. And, this is a tip that I'm pretty much giving for people that, didn't go to college like me. This is all stuff that I had to research on my own, and it's It's a good way to make sure that your work at least looks professional, because when the slush reader or the managing editor or the editor-in-chief opens your short story, the first thing they see is the layout of your document. So if you get that right, then that's already a point that you have that says you are professional and that you know what you're doing. The next big thing for me is, I've submitted short stories before with missing words, incorrect words, misspelled words, and that is such a rookie mistake, especially in short fiction, because if you're aiming for the sweet spot and you have a short story between 3,500, 5,000 words, you can revise and line edit that sucker 10 times in one day. So for me, what I like to do after I'm done revising, after I'm done reworking the actual content of the story and I'm going into my line edits, I read the story aloud, okay? Trust me. Read the story aloud to yourself, to someone else, it doesn't matter. Just read it out loud multiple times and you will catch things. You will catch, a missing word here or there, or, an incorrect word with a similar spelling to a word that you had meant, and things like this. And that's a big help, and you can do this, like I said, 10 times in one day. You could do this, you can take the time to really line edit your short story. And then usually what I like to do is I sleep on it, I come back to the story the next day, and then I read it aloud again. And this is, final pass stuff. This is the right before you're ready to send it out kind of stuff. A big thing too, once you have your manuscript ready, the next thing you want to really do is read the specific guidelines for each magazine, because they do differ. Most magazines want that standard doc format for your short story, but there are some magazines who prefer that your story be single-spaced. And if you can cater to the needs of the people you're submitting to, that's very respectful. And you want to be respectful, because putting out an online magazine monthly is so hard. Like, you think writing a short story is hard? Imagine having to find the stories, edit the stories, work with the authors, publish the stories, the poetry, the formatting, the art, the podcasts, all the moving parts of this magazine take a lot of work. So it's good to try and cater to the people you are submitting to, just so that you give them the impression, and put your foot forward and say, I'm easy to work with, kind of a thing. And when I say read the guidelines, read the guidelines. So many magazines want specific things. So many guidelines have lists of tropes that they do not find appealing any longer. There are certain magazines who really don't want explicit content, whether it's, gore or sexual or profane in nature. There's Beneath Ceaseless Skies. They only do secondary world fantasy. So if you try and send them your urban fantasy short story, you're fresh out of luck, and that's just a waste of time on your part and on their part. So any content in this magazine's guidelines, you need to read thoroughly. And a big thing here too is you need to read the magazines to which you are submitting. That's all that needs to be said about that. Just do it. If you're going to submit to a magazine, know what kind of stuff they publish, because it is vastly different. Just researching sci-fi fantasy magazine and then submitting to that magazine won't do you any good, because there are so many cross genres and different content, and different magazines publish far different things. Of course, there are general running themes, but every managing editor, every editor-in-chief, they all have different tastes, just like you or I. So just read the frickin' magazines you are submitting to. Cover letters. When I first started submitting short stories, I thought that a cover letter was like a query letter. Thank God I did research. A cover letter is not a query letter. For those of you who write novels and are querying, you know that a query letter, you are trying to sell an agent or editor your novel based on this clever, quippy summary of your story. That's not what a cover letter is. A cover letter is you as author basically being respectful, introducing yourself and your story, and that's it. You don't want to include, you're not supposed to, and you don't want to include a summary of your short story in your cover letter because your short story needs to stand on its own. Whether you summarize your story or not, someone at that magazine is going to read it, so there's no need to summarize it. The point of a query letter is to entice either an agent or editor to read your novel. You don't need to do that when you're submitting short stories. So, your cover letter, if you don't have any credentials, it's in a cover letter, you want to include your publication history and things like this. If you don't have any publication history, your cover letter would probably read something along the lines of, dear so-and-so, please find enclosed my short story, and you can say, like, I'm a fan of your magazine, I read it, I love it, or, I listen to the podcast, or, I love the interviews that you do, and, I hope my story is a good fit. You can say something about yourself if it's relevant. If you're writing a story about robots and you happen to build robots, that is considered relevant. And when you are addressing your cover letter, you can usually find it in the guidelines to who you should address your cover letter. If it's not in the guidelines, then address it to the editor-in-chief of that magazine. But these magazines, a lot of them are so big that they have separate editorial staff per genre, per section in the magazine. So just make sure you are addressing your cover letter to the appropriate person and not just saying, dear editor, because that's extremely impersonal, extremely disrespectful. Yeah, so anyway. And responses. More often than not, you'll probably get the form rejections, thank you for sending your story, so-and-so, unfortunately it's not a good fit for us, blah, blah, blah. But then there are occasions where the editor-in-chief or the managing editor actually goes out of their way to send you a personalized rejection. And this could say something along the lines of, I enjoyed reading your short story, so-and-so. Unfortunately, though it was written well, it wasn't a good fit for us. Or, though I enjoyed the premise, it just isn't what I'm looking for at this time. And they usually end these personalized rejections with I look forward to seeing your next story, or please send more, etc. And you never want to reply to a rejection. These people are so busy that you really just don't want to clog up their email, even if it's to say, thanks for the feedback or thanks for the quick turnaround. You don't want to reply to a rejection. But if you get a personalized rejection where they say, send more, or I look forward to seeing your next story, then send a new story whenever you have one, and you can include that in your cover letter. Say, dear so-and-so, please find enclosed my short story this. In response to my last short story, you said that you were excited to see more, yada, yada, yada. And make it personal, because, their people, your people, you can totally make it personal. that's fine. And then there's another type of response you could get to. This is a response that I currently received from a magazine, and it was one of our slush readers enjoyed your story. We want to hold it a little bit further, to take a second look, blah, 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 we'll hear from you soon, something like that. And then that's when you go into full-blown panic mode because someone at that magazine liked your story, and they're just going to hold on to it and keep you guessing. And aside from an acceptance, it's probably the best response you can get, although it's really nerve-wracking and I'm kind of like panicky all the time. But yeah, so that happens too. And when you get one of those emails, you can just shoot back and say, you know, thank you so much for your further consideration. I really look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, so-and-so. And things like that. I don't know what it's like to have one of my stories purchased, because that hasn't happened yet, unfortunately. But yeah, so those are just some things to look out for. Be professional, be respectful, do not respond to rejections for any reason. It's just totally not cool. I don't have a resource for you guys this week, but, you know, if you are preparing to send out some short fiction to some of these magazines, you know, I'll point out the ones that I submitted to. If you're looking for magazines with a short turnaround time, Clarkesworld and Lightspeed both get back to you within 24 hours, and that's pretty freaking amazing. So, you get sent to them. Apex is a really great magazine also and all these magazines are great to read, so definitely read them also. So Apex, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, really great. UnCanny magazine. There's the Dark magazine, which is horror, that I really enjoy. And then, of course, there's F&SF, Asimov's, which are science fiction oriented. There are a couple of science fiction magazines, but I don't write a whole lot of science fiction, so it's not really my cup of tea. Yeah, so, you know, that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. If you have any personalized questions, maybe about, you know, is your short story ready? What should you put in your cover letter because you're feeling kind of iffy about it? Just shoot me a comment and I will get back to you. Next week, I think we will, I don't know, we'll talk about something next week. So I'll see you guys then. For now, you should be submitting and writing stuff.